Hey everybody. So today we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 16. But before we do that, I have a couple of questions for you. And as always, if you want to, feel free to pause after each question and think about it. If you want to answer in the comments below, that's absolutely fine. But here we go. So first question is, how often do people ask teenagers or those who are younger what they want to do when they grow up or they get older? And then a follow-up question, how many times have people asked you that? How about this? How often do teenagers or younger people say that when they grow up or get older, they want to do blank? And follow-up question, how many times have you said that? Now, how about this question? Is there anything wrong about planning and dreaming about what you might do when you get older? My thought on this is not necessarily. It's not that it's wrong or anything like that, but it can give us a wrong impression. So, I guess another follow-up question, what wrong impression could someone get if all they think about is what they want to do when they get older? See, if that's the only question you're really asking yourself, or rather if that's all you do, you kind of neglect what could be done now. There are millions of people who focus so much on what they will do one day that they miss their whole lives. I knew kids growing up that couldn't wait to be an adult, couldn't wait to do X, Y, or Z, and because of that, they never really got to be a kid. I always wanted to drive. I always wanted to, be an adult, to have my own responsibilities and do the things that I wanted to be able to do those things. And so I kind of worked a lot when I was a kid. And some summers I worked a ton. I didn't really get to hang out and do things with my friends and stuff like that. So what happens to the people that focus on things just like that? Well, I think Yoda said it well while he was talking to the disembodied voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which was odd because he was actually with Luke at the anyways, he was talking about Luke to Obi-Wan, and he says, "This one, a long time I have watched." And I'm not doing my Yoda voice because it's horrible, but he says, "This one, a long time I have watched, or have I watched. All his life, he looked away to the future, the horizon. Never his mind on where he was, what he was doing." And I kind of think Yoda's statement can be applied to most of us today. So I want to ask a new question. What do you want to be? Or what do you want to do now? This month, this year, this season of your life? Why should any of us wait for a future that may or may not happen? Now, I'm not talking about things like getting a summer job or getting your learner's permit or getting your license, things like that. That's good stuff. That's fine. Those are good things to do. But what I'm talking about are the big things. I thought of all the big stuff as being later on in life. But what are some of the big things that you would want to do? The saving lives kind of stuff, or the changing the world kind of stuff. Why do we leave these things to the distant future? Why not now? What's stopping you from doing something great right now? And, for many of us, maybe it's fear. Fear of failure, or fear that people won't take us seriously because I'm too young, or I'm too this, or I'm too that, or I think that's kind of why I hear some people that are teenagers and younger, and even some college students say, "I'm just a kid. What can I do?" Rather than taking that as an excuse, though, which most of us do, I want to take it as a question. I'm just a kid. What can I do? A little difference in how we say that when we're taking it as a question and rather than as an excuse. And so if you've ever thought, well, I'm just a kid, a teen, a student, I'm nothing special. Well, let's take a look at what you really are. And the first thing I want to look at is this. It says, what you are does not have to be what people think you are. Let's check this out. We're going to look at David in 1 Samuel chapter 16. It says, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. So Samuel comes to Jesse, David's dad, looking to anoint the next king of Israel from among his sons. Jesse brings out his sons, and one by one, they were evaluated and passed over for the honor of being anointed the next king. Finally, Samuel asked Jesse, he says, listen, are these all your sons? Is this everybody? And that's when Jesse kind of says, well, no, I've got one more. One that he didn't bother to call. So let's skip ahead a couple of verses. Look at verse, same chapter, 16, but verse 10 through 12. It says, and Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. So like I said before, he saw them, evaluated them, passed them over. Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he's keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was a ruddy. Now that could mean that he was young, or it could mean that he was reddish. Think about it. He's been out in the sun with the sheep and he just ran. Or it could mean that he has a young complexion and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Question for you. Why do you think that David didn't call, or excuse me, sorry, I apologize. Why do you think that Jesse didn't call David when he called all the other brothers? Now, we don't know exactly the reason why David wasn't called. It doesn't really tell us. What we do know is that Jesse didn't call his youngest son. And we know it's his youngest because he kind of tells us. And we know they didn't call him because he tells us that also. But all he said was that David was keeping the sheep. Now, in my mind, this means one of two things. So either the job of shepherding was so important that he couldn't stop tending them, even though there was an honored guest coming. Or David was so unimportant that he could just tend the sheep while the honored guest was coming. I kind of think it was the second one, more so than the first. So keeping sheep was not a greatly respected position. It wasn't something it was, oh wow, that's an honor. I can't believe they're letting you keep the sheep. Wow, that's great. That's not how that worked. And so it wasn't a greatly respected position. And not only that, but it's not like David was the only one who was capable of keeping the sheep, because David couldn't be around them all the time. And so there are other people who kept the sheep too. So I kind of think it was that this isn't something that he needs to be here for. This is important. This is a big deal. David can go stay out there. He's younger. Not as important as the older boys. But that's kind of where I'm thinking he goes. So being treated like this could have led David to think that he wasn't that important. Matter of fact, in my own life and in our lives, when we're treated like that, we tend to think, well, I guess I'm not that important. When we're treated as unimportant, we begin to think that we might be unimportant. I've had jobs before where I wasn't treated as important, and I started to think, well, I guess in the grand scheme of things, I'm not really important here. And so we can tend to start thinking like that. And the more we think like that, the less we feel we can do something great, or we can do the important. Understand though, just because you're young doesn't mean you can't do something great. As a matter of fact, in other people's minds, David wasn't king material. Not at all. Yet God chose him to be king. All the other brothers, the tall, the big, the strong, the good looking, all that stuff, goes in front of this guy. And if you read the passage through the part that we skipped, it says, oh, Samuel looks at one of the brothers, oh my gosh, it's so tall, so strong, so this must be the one. And God says, listen, hold on. You're looking on the outward, I'm looking on the inward. This ain't him. Keep going. And he does this to every single one until he comes to David. And he says, that's the one. He's the one. And so others didn't think David needed to be there. He didn't think it was important enough for him to be there, whatever it was. But yet God chose him. God didn't wait for David to be older. He didn't wait for him to look like a king. God chose him for something great while no one thought he was great. Because God prepares people for the future by using people where they are now. Think about that. God prepares people for the future by using people where they are now. Just because you're young doesn't mean that you have to be what people think you are. Now, we can see this in our world today. I Googled, teenagers who have changed the world. And one of the things came up was this website called The Bright Side. And it talked about a few different people. I just want to mention a couple of people. There's a guy named Jack Ondraka who developed a test to determine pancreatic cancer cells that was 100 times faster and like half as expensive as the rest of the tests. And he was 15 when he did it. There's another person named Anne, I'm not even going to be able to say this, Makosinski? I'm not sure. She developed a flashlight that runs off of the heat that your body generates. You got a bunch of other people. Alex Deans, he developed a system that would help people who cannot see to walk around their neighborhoods and things like that without hurting themselves. You get a bunch of people who have done these crazy, cool things, and all of them did it when they were younger. You get one kid named Boyan Slat, which I thought was really cool. At 16 years old, he's from the Netherlands, he figured out through a science project for school how we could help clean up the oceans of plastic and things like that. And something that they said would take thousands of years could be done in just a few years using something like this. The last one I want to talk about is something I thought was cool because it's something that affects all of our lives. And so it was this 14-year-old farm boy who liked science. And so he went to one of his teachers one day and he wrote out on the board to a diagram to explain his idea that he had to his teacher. His teacher had to write down notes trying to figure out, okay, so he could decipher it later on. But it turns out that at 14 years old, this kid had an idea that would go crazy and everybody would know what it is. It took him 7 years to develop it. At the age of 21, he invented the first TV. A 14-year-old had the idea for TV, and now everybody has one in their house. You can change the world right where you are. You do not have to wait. You do not have to do any of this. It's not something that can be done, that you have to wait for the future. You can do it now. David was going to be the king. The one who thought nothing, or who nothing was thought of, would now be the ruler of the nation. We're going to look more into this as we continue looking through David, but just think about this. What people think you are does not determine who you are. What God says you are determines who you are. And God says you have worth. God says you have value. And God says that you can do great things where you are today and who you are today. You guys have a great night. Love you, and I'll see you soon.